go over again today, and I apologize for that ahead of time, but I hope it'll be worth it. So let me share my screen. I've already put ahead of time inside our channel, I put Slido on the guided project. We'll be going over using this as a guided project. I'm not going to be talking about that right now. I'm going to first go over our learning objectives, and then I'll explain what this project is and where we're going to take it. All right. Hopefully I've gone through the training kit. If you haven't, then you're going to want to again. I'm also going to say that I know some of you are going to need to go through this lecture, maybe somebody else's lecture if they resonate with you better, more than once, more than today. And I know that's asking a lot because you guys are busy, but this is, like I say, it'll be worth it once you learn it. So we're going to learn about Redux today. And a little bit about Redux that we're going to be learning about is going to be familiar based on the last class that we did. Because the reducer that we learned in the last class is an extraction of something that was created in Redux to solve this problem. And for that matter, the problem that Redux solves is the same problem that Context API solves. Okay? So it's the same thing. It's a little different in that the Context API is for contextual state. You can have different pieces of state throughout your application. Redux is there, and it's assumed that it's going to be a complete application level state. One big state object for your entire application. That's usually how Redux is implemented and how it's created. And so that's what we're going to do. I'll learn a different way to have that application level state. That's what Redux is. You're learning that now, even though arguably Context API with hooks, that all these things are going to be a natural replacement for what Redux has provided for people in the past. And you're learning it now because a lot of code is still written in Redux. And for that matter, there are going to be some people and some code bases that you look at that will be, they prefer Redux over the Context API for whatever reasons. And it may be that these APIs will leapfrog each other, and there's a good reason to do Redux now over Context. And so you just need to learn these different ways of doing it. And then we're going to get into a little more detail about the Redux store. We're going to show you how Redux works. We're going to create a Redux store. Think about this term. When you see Redux store, also refer to that as the application level state. That is the application, Redux is storing the full application level state for us. And we're going to be using reducers for that. And then it says specifically connect. There's actually a function called to connect with Redux that we're going to be using to hook our components up to the Redux store, aka application level state. And then the next thing we're going to do, and this is where it might get a little confusing, you already know about actions. We went over actions last time. Actions are objects that have a type and an optional payload, right? In Redux, you create something called action creators. And this is going to seem like a additional over-engineered superfluous step. And it's going to seem that way because it kind of is, but it's how it was implemented. And I'm going to take you through that and show you exactly, we're going to step through the debugger inside the browser, and I'm going to show you what exactly it's doing with these. Specifically, you're going to see that we don't call dispatch ourselves. The dispatch part of the reducer that we get from use reducer, and we call dispatch to actually have that action be taken for us. We don't do that in Redux. The Redux system calls dispatch for us, and we will step through and show that. But the way it does it is Redux will pass to us, we will tell it what actions we want to create. We'll create the actions creator for them. They will wrap the action creator around something and then hand that to us. When we call that, they will then call dispatch based on what we pass back to it. And I know it's a little abstract. You don't understand what I'm talking about now. But hopefully when you go back and read this part or listen to this part again, if you do, that you will understand now what I'm talking about after today's lesson. And then, of course, we need to write reducers. We already have our reducers written. We're going to write some more reducers that will respond to the actions and then update that global state or update the Redux store. And this is a good diagram to see how it works. We talked about state before. You remember how we talked about state? Again, this is very similar to the context API. We are having a one-way flow through our reducer. The application level state is the store. Our reducer updates the state, and then updates the view. Actions are taken. And then we'll talk about middleware's next lesson, so you can ignore that for now. But then we have a dispatcher. Redux is going to take care of that for us, and then we're going to progress. So let's do with our first step. So again, the first explanation that we have here, explain Redux. Redux is basically what context API is. It's a way to give application level state. Now let's go ahead and look how to use Redux. The first thing you need to know is that before we were doing use reducer, and our project today, our project is, it's similar to our last one. Our last one, we were just doing title and being able to update the title. And you can see in this application, we have an index.js with an app. We have two components, one called title and one called Dragon List. The title is this part up here at the very top of the page. That is the title of our list here. This is similar to what we built with use reducer. In fact, if you go and look at the title, you'll see that we are, in fact, pulling in use reducer from React, and we are doing use reducer just like we built last time. We've also added on to this a Dragon List. And the Dragon List is this part in the middle where you are updating what's this part and the new member and add member button. It's the rest of the form. This is a list of members that we have that are dragons. It's like a dragon club is what we have. And whether or not they have dragon status is what this icon is showing. And then a way to add new members. And you will notice that that is not implemented yet for us. We're going to be doing that here in just a minute. So this is the part we're going to be reduxifying. We're going to build this through Redux. I also want you to note ahead of time, the Dragon List is a class component. So we're going to be using Redux with a class component, but we're also going to first reduxify. That's not a term that's used, by the way. It's just a term I use. Hopefully you know what I mean. We're going to turn this reducer, we're going to turn it into a Redux app. We're going to actually get the title, and we're going to make the title be part of our application level state. It already is with the reducer. We use reducer. It's pulling the state back from here, but we're going to change that. We're going to actually take the title. It's specifically, if we go look at our reducers. So in this case, we have reducers and we have index that has a title reducer. And if we look at our import of that on title, we have title reducer. Okay, that's not going to work. I was doing some refactor. Oh yeah, that works. That works just fine. All right. I was doing some refactoring right beforehand, but it all should work. So we have our title reducer, and that title reducer is what's being passed to use reducer. So we're going to use the same reducer for Redux. Again, this is a pattern that Redux helped create and helped make popular. So it's going to be the same reducer, but we're going to be doing things a little bit different here. So first, let's start. So that's our goal. Our goal is to first take this title name, and when we update it, this title name that is doing that through our use reducer and title. I'm going to get rid of Dragon List right now because we're going to get to that in a minute. In our title.js, this use reducer is what we're doing that with. We're now going to make at least the title use Redux instead. And remember, reducer is part of the React system. It's part of React library, and so you pull in the use reducer hook from React. Redux is not. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add Redux to our dependencies, and we need to add React Redux to our dependencies. And you'll notice that that might be a little confusing because now why do we have two different libraries? The reason is Redux was built to be an application level state library for all of JavaScript, not just for React. right? So you can actually create an application level state for an Angular project or for a plain JavaScript project using Redux, right? So it is built for that. And then there's tools inside React Redux to make it easier to use and to hook into the React state system, right? So that's what the difference is. You'll know if you're pulling something from Redux, it is something that has been abstracted to be part of application level state by itself. If you're pulling something from React Redux, it is because it's specific to how React does things, and it's there for help us with React. Okay, so the first step, let me make sure I pull my notes up so I don't get too far ahead of myself. Yeah, the first step is we want to create that application level state, aka, as it says over here, the Redux store. The Redux store. So our application level state, we're going to pull that from import create store from Redux. And then we want to create that application level state by calling that is a function. So we're then going to make an application level store create store. Wonderful. It's not going to work for us right now, though. And the reason it's not going to work for us is because our create store needs to have a reducer passed into it. And so we already have our reducer. Our reducer is already listed. We saw that before. Index reducers, there's a title reducer. And so we are going to import title reducer as reducer from, and we are in index, so we want to go from reducers. And then we can pass in reducer. There we go. So we've now created our application level store. Notice on 5, this is something you can do with this import syntax. You can actually rename what you have to put on the left-hand side of the as. That's what it's being exported as in reducer. But then you can rename it by doing an as, and we're renaming it to reducer here. And you'll see why we're doing that towards the end of the lesson. I hope that becomes clear. All right, the next, now we have a store object. We have a store object. In fact, let's just take a look at what that does, what that is. And we can see the store object. Oh, look at that. Let me just make sure. You know, I like to do this, bk index.js, store. Okay, so it is this object. And it has, look, it has some interesting things that might be familiar for you. It is the Redux store. The one that is most interesting, probably right now, and that you're most familiar, is there's a function called dispatch. Right? That's part of the Redux store. So when I told you that it's going to be taking care of that itself, we're not going to be calling dispatch directly, at least this class. Next class, we're going to find out how to do that. But this class, we're letting Redux take care of that call to dispatch for us, right? But as you can see, this is just an object that has a bunch of information that a little confusing to you right now, but we're going to make this a little clearer, which is great. Okay, so now we have our store. If we took out the console log, it's telling us you have a store, but you're not using it. That's what the yellow squiggly lines here say. And so the way for us to use it is we can import provider from React Redux. And again, like I said before, if you're pulling it from React Redux, it is specifically for React. And you can logically look at this and say, well, obviously it is. This uppercase provider is a component. It is a React component. And so now we can specify, like we did with the context API, we now have a provider for Redux. And we can come down here and create our provider. Our provider needs us to pass in a store. But notice, and this may be a little confusing to you as well, all I did was I wrapped this app around provider as we were in the render call. This here technically is no different than if I did that up here. I did it there, it would be the same thing. Now it's airing out because obviously it's confusing with the other provider. But the point is, it's the same thing. It'd be the same effect. And so it doesn't really matter. I'm just showing you a little bit more syntax that, you know, there's a million different ways to do everything. You need to become familiar and be able to flow with things that look a little off, you don't understand, and then you learn, right? That's going to happen your whole career, by the way. Okay. So now, like we had with the context API, we have our application wrapped in a provider that is providing our application state that they're calling a store. So that stores all of our application level state. That's fantastic. And that application level state is being initialized from our reducer, right? The reducer that we're passing in, the same reducer that we used in the use reducer last time, we're pulling that reducer in the title reducer. We can now update title and toggle editing. Okay. Now we need to reference this store, and we're going to do that in title. So we come over to the title, and we need to import connect from React Redux. And I'm going to go over connect here. Connect, I want you to really pay attention to this because this seems to trip people up here. Connect is just a function that returns a function that you then call that function to return a component. Or if you remember, connect is a function that returns a higher order component. Remember, higher order component is a function that takes a component and returns a component, right? And I know that that's hard to follow right now. I'm going to first show you how it's done in syntactical way, and then I'm going to break it out to hopefully make it a bit easier for you, or at least to get easier for you to understand. You have to also understand people in JavaScript, and they're not wrong in doing this. They like to make code concise and to not create superfluous variables. And so it makes things difficult to understand at times. But when you see this right here, what you see this right here, this is the kind of reducing clarity a little bit to make the code a bit more efficient. You know, before I said you don't want to do that. You want to actually opt for clarity, but there's a base element of that you want to do. And what we're doing here, what connect is. So right now, we're going to use the higher order component that comes from connect to wrap title, and then to pass that back to the React system, which will then be able to respond to this provider, be able to do some things with that provider. And so we're going to call connect. Connect takes two parameters. The first parameter is a function. I'm going to make it a blank function for now. The second parameter is an object, and I'm going to tell you about those in a minute. And then it calls, connect calls, once you call connect, it returns back a function that takes a component and returns a component. So this title is now returning a component that has been enhanced, right? It is a now enhanced through whatever connect returned, okay? And I know that that's, again, hard to follow. Follow with me. We'll figure this out. We'll make it happen. So before I actually break this down, though, I want to explain this first call to connect. This first call to connect. I want to explain that, and I want to explain this first parameter. That first parameter, we usually write it like this: map state to props. And that's what it is. It is a function that returns an object okay? A function that returns an object that will map the state of your application. So again, the state of our application, we go look at index.js. The state is coming from the reducer that's initialized on line 12 of our main index.js. That reducer, which if we then look at the reducer, this is the state. This is our application level state. So that's what's being passed into this function. The Redux system will pass that into Connect, and it's expecting you to pass back an object that will tell them what state you are interested in for this component. So it knows to pass that state through a property of the component. Okay? No, that's a little confusing. Let me say it again. This is the application level state. We don't access this application level state directly inside of our component. Instead, we are tying to the Redux system. We're telling the Redux system, when you have a change to these specific pieces of your state, we want you to pass those pieces to us as a property. And notice here, we don't have props yet because we weren't using them, but now we need to use them because the Redux system is going to pass us whatever we tell it here on line 48 in that object. It's going to say, when there's a change to the application level state, I need to pass that to this component as this property. And the way that happens is you can do, what we are interested in is title, state title. Remember, if we look at the reducer, our state is this object, an initial state, and we have a title. So we are saying that for the Redux system here, we're trying to pull this title out, make it part of the Redux system. And so we're saying on the left, it says title. We want this title, we want this on the left. This is the property that will be passed to our component, which here on the left, that's the property that's going to be passed. And that property will be passed and updated when the application level title state gets updated. No matter where it gets updated, whenever that state title gets updated, it knows, hey, title.js is interested in this. This title component is interested in this. And I'm going to make this because we got so many titles in here, and that could get really confusing and probably already is. I'm going to show this a little clearer by calling this title on props to let you know that this part is what the property name is going to be that's passing in. And to refresh our memories, properties are usually passed in as a property of the component. Right now, I'm sorry, hello equals hi. Now we have a superfluous property that's being passed to our title that is the name of hello, so it would be props.hello that has the value of hi. Right? That's usually how properties are sent. In this case, it's going to pass in properties. The Redux system enhances this for us. But that's what map state to props does. So let's put that. That is what this first item is, map state to props. I'm going to take this out so it does not confuse us. And we're getting an error here. And it's a very valid error, and it makes sense. The problem is, if you'll notice, when we were doing we do the initial state on use reducer to get our state in dispatch for the reducer. But we don't pass the initial state anywhere in our initialization of Redux. We're just passing in a reducer. And so the Redux system is already expecting, it calls your reducer first with an action that is difficult to discern. It has an weird action name. It's part of the Redux system. It's making a weird call that you didn't do, the Redux system is, that basically is saying, give me your initial state, okay? And so what we have to do is, in relation to whatever that action is, notice I'm being vague. I don't know what that action is. Remember, actions are identified by type. I don't know what the type's going to be, so I'm not going to create a case statement for that type. But guess what? I don't need to. Why? Because whenever an action is passed in to our reducer that we do not know what the case is, we default to returning back the state that it passed into us. Now, what it's saying is I want the state back. So what we can do, this is a JavaScript thing, we're going to initialize state. If state that's being passed into us is undefined or null, because that's what that first call does. If it is, then state will be assigned whatever we pass here. You can see now it's rendering properly. All right, to make that clear, the Redux system is going to call our reducer with a null or undefined for the state and some weird action name that will change depending on your application. You could not even write a reliable case statement for that. But it's fine because what you need to do for all your reducers in your switch statement is pass back a default value when you're not doing anything to the state. And that default value is is passing back the state. And guess what? If the state is we're passing the state back to them. If the state that they pass to us is blank, we're initializing this state variable with our initial state up here. Right, so that's pretty cool stuff. Pretty neat. So now it's rendering over on our screen over here. Things are working fine. So now what we have, show it again. In fact, I'm going to step through this. I'm going to show y'all. We're going to do a component. I'm going to step through. I'm going to do a component. We're going to look at our components. And I want you to see title and look what we have as a prop on title. We are now getting a property passed to us. Property passed to us that is the Dragon member list. But also notice title, we're not passing any properties into it. This is something the Redux system is doing for us. It is passing to our title component in the props. It is passing now because of this mapping on line 49. And the name of that property it's going to pass to us is whatever we put on the left-hand side of this colon in our mapping, right? And that's why when we see it, it is title on props. So now we can reference inside of our component, we can reference this title. Let's do that. Let's see, let's do that here on line 19. This is the displaying of the title. We are getting that from state in the use reducer. We now want to get that from props. And it's going to be title on props. And boom, look at that. Which makes sense because we see title on props has the default. All right, so now we're slowly refactoring this. We're now using the Redux system for the title on props display. Okay. All right. And now we need to make it so that we can update that. And this is, that was strange. So I hate it when computer starts playing something, you don't know where it's from. I guess I will just turn that off. So if you do at me, I'm not going to hear it on this extra computer I have over here. So I don't know, try to get my attention elsewhere. Or more importantly, ask questions here. We have 5 minutes for break, so let's start this. So we have map state to props. How we actually change or update our application level store in our component. Notice what we're doing now is we have a we have a dispatch that's being called from use reducer. I told you that Redux, we don't call the dispatch, right? Instead, there's a different way for us to update it. And so what we need to do is on line 36, we need to refactor this use of dispatch. If we're trying to just update the title, we need to refactor this use of dispatch and refactor it so it's using the Redux store. And here's how that is done. we're now going to talk about action creators. If we come and look here, the fourth part of our lesson, actions and actions creators. Like I told you last time, we went over actions, and that's what we're dispatching with the use reducer. An action is an object that has a type and an optional payload. Must have a type, have an optional payload. We'll notice again up here on this dispatch, this action for toggle editing does not have a payload because we don't need it. We're just toggling on and off, so it's fine. It uses what it does based on the existing state. So this is our action. What we do in Redux is we create action creators. That's what we do for Redux. We create action creators. So let me create a directory here, and then I will give you a definition of what that is. It's a pretty simple thing. So we're going to create an actions directory, and then we're going to create a base level index. And now we're going to create an action creator. Let's see, we're going to export const update title. This is our action creator name. Update title equals new title, and then we are going to return, a action. We're going to create an action. And the action we're going to return here is update title. And then our payload, we want this to be like it was over in our title.js. Our payload is going to be just the new title text. And that's what we're passing to our update title. So our payload is just going to be new title. This is an action creator. Let me console log this out. ek actions index.js. Sorry. Actions index.js. Update title. New title. New title. Let me do a word wrap on this. There we go. Okay. So we're going to actually log that out and take a look at it. We're not doing anything with update title now. We have 1 minute. Let me see. So what we're going to do with update title, we are exporting it. We're going to use that in our title.js. Okay. I'm going to import update title from actions. All right, now this is where things might get a little confusing. And I'm going to leave you with a cliffhanger here when we go on a break. We're going to go on a 5-minute break. Because when you look at the update title is, it's a function that's named well for us. It's doing an action that we want, but it really is an action creator because it's not actually taking an action. It's not dispatching the action. All it's doing is creating an action for us, right? But you might be thinking, update title is the name that we want. So what we want to do is we want to come down where we are updating the title on this onClick, and we just then come down here and call, instead of dispatch, we call update title with our new title text. You may think that that's what you want to do. That is not what you want to do. This update title that you are passing in needs the React system, or the Redux system, needs to know about that action creator. It needs to know about it because it needs to do things with it before it hands it back to you to then use. All right. So I'm going to then, little cliffhanger, this No, don't do that. I'm going to put this back in so it's not blank. All right. Then I'm going to show you, and it has something to do with this object that we are using to call connect, this second parameter. That's what it has something to do. That's what the update title is used for. And on that note, we're going to take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we'll hit questions. So please go to the Slido, ask your questions there. If you have questions for your cohort, just talk amongst yourselves here. Yeah, if you have questions about this, now's the time to answer, because we're going to ramp it up a little bit. So after this, we'll see you all in 5 minutes. back. Okay. I'm going to slow it down a little bit right now because I hopefully y'all had a nice relaxing break and your head cleared a little bit. I am going to, before we get to the questions, I think it's great that y'all are asking the questions. Ask more if you have them. Before we get that, I'm going to show this action, what we're going to do with that action creator. And then I'm going to go over to the questions. And we are going to go through those questions and maybe take even 10 minutes to do it. Perhaps more if we need it. So I want y'all to be able to ask questions. I'm going to tell you that that if indeed during that last break you just had, if you maybe cried a little bit, that's perfectly fine. I completely understand because I understand this can be tough, right? And it is. And but guess what? It's going to be worth it, right? So, and I know there's a question here about why. Why are we doing Redux? I will cover that as well. But for now, let me finish this because I think this will complete the loop. In fact, this will complete the loop all the way through with this one component. And then we're going to use the rest of the class time with building out the application for the application level state. So honestly, when I show you this part on line 58, that meets all of our objectives for today. But then we're going to drill further on them, and I need y'all to ask questions if you don't understand it. All right, so here is what this part does. So we are getting update title, our action creator. I told you before the break that the Redux system needs to know about this action creator because the Redux system needs to do something with it, right? The way that but the point is this update title is only relevant to this component. This is the only component that updates title. So this is the right place to let the Redux system know about update title. And the way that we do that is through this first call to connect. The second parameter, this object, is another mapping that we are saying this is an action creator. And if we had more action creators in here that we're interested in, actions for this, then we would add them to this object. But it's going to be passed into the Redux system. The Redux system calls connect. It then looks at this object and it says, okay, this update title. Remember, the way I did this here, remember, that's the same as doing update title, update title. Right, there's a little bit of reflection. It basically says the left side, the key is the name of the variable. And remember, this variable is being pulled in up here on line 6 from our action. It's our action creator. So it's a function, and it knows it's a function. So we're making a function, and an action creator is a function that returns an action. That's pretty much it, a function that returns an action. Now, obviously, you need to enhance it and update it and the type and all that kind of stuff, but it's a function that returns an action. And so we are importing that function that returns an action. We're passing it to the connect for Redux. And remember how on map state to props, it's passing in that state into our props. Update title is also going to be passed to us through the props. That is how the Redux system communicates with our component. It's always through the props. And in this case, what it passes to us is not going to be the update title that we tell it about. It's going to wrap that in something else that it passes to us so that when we call it, the Redux system is aware that we are calling this thing. And then it knows to call the dispatch function. Okay. So that is what this update title is doing, which means, and I'm going to factor this out. So we're going to update the title here. I'm going to factor this out, and we're going to say handle update title. We're going to make this a little less cluttered by creating a handler. Let's handle update title. We want to prevent default. Because again, that's happening on a button click. You generally want to prevent the default on button clicks unless you actually want to try to submit an empty form. Although there is no form around this, so it won't do it, but it's generally a good idea. So we're preventing default there. And then what we were doing before is we were calling dispatch. And we had a no down here. No, you don't want to call the update title because the update title is just an action creator. All this is going to do is it's going to pass back an action and then move on. It's not going to do anything else. Instead, what we want to do is we want to call props update title. All right. And so, yeah, so we want to call props update title. And okay, so this could be a little confusing at this point because that's going to update the title. We're still using the reducer state. We're still using that now for the editing. We haven't factored that out. We may not. I may do it just for clarity's sake later. I haven't factored it out. So we're still using the use reducer for the toggling of the state. Remember, the toggling of the state is when you click this button, we go from this to that. And before, when we updated our state, when we update the title, we actually update the editing to false. We go back to that. The problem is this editing is not going to be referenced by the Redux system now. And so just for a factory, and just flow with me on this, we need to actually here call it dispatch. Since we are using the is editing, we need to call the dispatch of toggle editing now. And this is just a temporary measure for us to make it. The reason you need to do that is when we click on the button, the update title, to update the title, we needed to now go back to display the title, okay? And so to make it clear, let's look at our componentry and look at the title. And you see that we now have title and props, and then we have another prop called update title. This doesn't show it as a function, but it is. Remember, this second parameter to connect is saying take the update title function, action creator, and then pass it to us so we know on the props, so we know on line 21, we know how to update the title now. And when we update the title, it will affect the Redux system state underneath. Okay. That's everything. Let's go hit your questions. Okay. We are just replacing dispatch in the component with actions. It's a little more than that because remember, this is sort of reduced to just the reducer part, and it has a dispatch that we're then calling. This use reducer is not actually using an application level state. All right. So yes, we are not calling dispatch. In fact, the next lesson, we are going to get the dispatch from React or from Redux, and I'm going to show it to you in use here today, later. But it is also creating this application level store and hooking that up as a provider to our components so that we can connect to the application level store. And so it knows that whatever state we're interested in, it will pass that state to our component as a property. So it's doing application level store as well as it's going to call dispatch for us, and it does that in a complex way, maybe a little convoluted, by passing us on the props. It passes to us the action creator but it's wrapped around other things. I'm going to show that to you here in a minute once I answer some of these questions. I'm lost. I know. I'm sorry. If you can figure out where you're lost, what sort of question to ask, please do that, because I really do want to help you. If you're completely lost, this may be one of those things where you have to listen to it multiple times. There was a Lambda School student that I actually met. He was one of the team leads in a cohort after this story. But this guy, you probably heard about him. Hopefully it's a legend. He moved from Cuba, was in the country 4 months, didn't speak the language. His name was Jorge. And he was driving Lyft, I think, a gig economy to make ends meet. Heard about Lambda School, still did not speak English very well. Heard about Lambda School, said he'd give it a try. He says that he understood about 40% of what each lesson was, the instructor. And he would go back through the lesson using Google Translate in order to better understand what was there in the lesson. And he did that as many times as he needed to do to learn the material. 9 months later, he then gets a job as an intern. And then when he was working with me as a team lead, he ended up leaving as a team lead to get it, because he moved within a couple of months to a mid-level developer, right? Clearly, he's very bright, but I don't expect that he's brighter than y'all, but he's also very determined. And so it may be that you need to listen to this material over again, and maybe listen from other recordings from other people, because maybe that resonates with you more than me. If that's the case, then do it, but I can tell you it's worth it. Okay. How is Redux more useful than what we were doing before we learned this? Asking because it seems unintuitive, and I can't imagine writing this code myself. And that is combined with this one down here, which is the industry preferred context API. I'm going to answer both of those questions this way. I would not say that Redux is more useful than what we've learned already. You can already see that the context API seems a bit more intuitive because it does things through hooks. When Redux was created, hooks was not part of React, right? And the whole reducer pattern was popularized and made a part of the React ecosystem because of Redux, all right? And because of that, the reason you need to know about it now is, when now here it says, which is industry preferred, I can tell you the people I work with want to do context API with hooks. That's what they want to do. All new code will be written that way. That being said, there's plenty of Redux in our existing code base that these people work with because that's how it was built. And today, when you guys learn everything you need to learn from Lambda School and move on, it is likely that the jobs that you interview with, they will have, a lot of them will have a Redux requirement because that's what a lot of their code base is written on. And so at some point in the distant future, I would not be surprised if Lambda School, with all their magic understanding of the industry, I mean, they're really good at figuring out what it is that you guys need to know and understand. At some point, it wouldn't surprise me if that gets removed from the list at some point. But right now, it's there because it's going to increase your pool of companies that would be interested in you. And so it's worth learning. Plus, it's I know it's complex, but again, another thing that's happening at Lambda School is hopefully we're helping you learn how to learn in a high intensity environment. Because I can tell you now, if it's not Redux now, if everything was a little more simpler, there's going to be something that comes along that your company and your team is going to use that's going to take a bit of sussing out for you, and you're going to have to figure out how to figure out this non-intuitive interface. That is going to happen to you. So I think that answers those. So it really depends. What's does the industry prefer? It is basically based on your team and based on the code base. And again, I think it's the same answer down here. When would you use Redux versus Context API? When would I use it is when the code base requires it. when the company requires it. Myself, if I'm building something new, I'm using Context API. Okay. I think, oh yeah, that was moved up. Okay. I lost it down there. Yeah, thanks for moving that up, whoever was ever able to do that. Okay, I don't understand why we are putting our dispatch and props update title into the handle update function. Okay. Yes, I know that's confusing. I will go over that to hopefully make it less confusing. The thing that's making this confusing right now is that we are using both reducer, we're using the use reducer, and we're using Redux. The use reducer is creating this state object, which we are now calling a component level state object, right, on line 10. That's what use reducer is doing. Redux is using this store. This is like a different state, okay? So we're creating two different states that are not synchronized inside our title. And the reason we're doing that is because we are refactoring piecemeal. We only now, and what we've configured here is that the toggle editing function or dispatch is what we're doing the use reducer for. But the update title and the title state itself is being used from the Redux store. So there's a little disconnect here in that we're using this state for the use reducer, and it also seems weird because we're using the exact same title reducer for both, which is fine. I mean, that's actually something to really drill home to you. This reducer pattern that we taught you last time is it's the exact same reducer for use reducer and for Redux, because it is the same, but the state that it is updating, on dispatch, this dispatch call for toggle editing, this dispatch call is updating this state on line 10. This props update title call, the props update title call that is connected to our Redux system, is updating the Redux store on line 12 and then passing those updates out to anybody who's interested in the Redux store. Okay? So that's why the question was, why are we doing update title and dispatch? Update title to update the Redux store, because that's what's connected to the Redux store down here at the bottom on our connect call, but then also doing a dispatch. Now you may look at this and say, but our reducer is we already put this in last time. We put it in so that when we update the title, we automatically change the editing to false. The problem is, and that works, it's perfectly right, it's exactly what's happening. The problem is, when we call this update title that's connected to this application store, this Redux store, when we call this updates title, it is updating the is editing that's part of the application level store. It is not updating this store object. Those are separate. It's not updating this state object on line 10, and that state object is what our application is using right now to determine whether to show, because we haven't refactored that out yet, right? So that is what is happening there. That's why we're calling dispatch and props update on the handle update function, because we need to update title, we need to update title for the Redux store, but then we also need to let the local state, which is using reducer, we need to let the local state know we should no longer be in is editing mode. Right? In fact, the way that I would prefer refactoring this out, because we don't really need a reducer right here, I would just create it as a state variable, because this really, whether or not we're editing, really is a component level state, because the only thing we're using it for is to determine if we're showing the title or if we're editing the title. Right? So I will refactor that out in a minute, and then you'll see that we will not be dispatching here. Instead, we'll just update the state of the is editing, and it'll then go back to where we want it. I hope that was clear. Okay, so basically Redux is older, and we should know it for working on established products, but people are preferring Context API, and that's where it's going. I'm going to generally say yes to that. That is correct, but it will not surprise me if y'all interview at places that have no expectations of going to Context API. I mean, part of the problem is Context API needs hooks, which means you need a later version of React. There's going to be a lot of React still on earlier versions that need Redux because you can't use a Context API, you can't use hooks. A part of it's going to be on that. Part of it's also going to be that's just what they prefer, right? I mean, the engineers I work with, I'll say this, the engineers I directly work with are all gung-ho for hooks, all gung-ho for Context API. Our new application we're building is using those, but just within our same company, there are other engineering teams that aren't far removed. We're all working on the same broader product. There's other teams that are still using Redux that have not, they're still trying to be convinced about hooks. And we are doing all these lunch and learns, and we're showing them our excitement and showing them our engineering we're going through. But I mean, you'll find out that there's always going to be engineers that place a lot of value on what they currently know. And there's, by the way, that's not bad. That's not bad because they know that the cognitive effort that's going to take for them to learn Context API, that cognitive effort may be too much to pay for the current sprint that they are on. They have not factored in time in their sprints to learn something new or to explore it, right? And that's something that you have to fight for when you're engineers. You have to tell the product teams, and the good ones will understand this. You have to tell them, we need time to refactor, and part of that refactoring is time to explore. And there are other companies. I worked at a company where refactoring was a dirty word. They never let you refactor, and guess what? Their code base reflected that. It was a huge hodgepodge of a mess to deal with. And so you're going to have to figure out these strategies on what to do. So yes, again, the way I said it before, and I think this is the best answer for you to understand, you will likely be going on interviews with companies that expect you to know Redux in order to work there. And you don't want to narrow that pool to move those companies out. In fact, I'm actually curious. I'm going to Instructure careers. I'm going to see, well, I'll look this up on the next break. I'll look it up on the next break. I don't want to waste time here. Because it wouldn't surprise me if our listings say you need Redux, even though my team doesn't even use it. So, all right. Although my company does tend to just, we don't even care. Like when I came to this company, I had never used React or Ruby, and it was a React Ruby code base they put me on. They're interested in finding people who are great software engineers, and it doesn't matter if you don't know it. You can learn it on the job, which is what I did. Okay, this one I will go over in a minute. I know this is confusing. This is confusing to a lot of you. Remember I told you that what connect is. Connect is a function that you call, which is this part here. It's a function that you call that returns a function, and that is an unnamed function right now. Right? Connect is returning a function that we immediately call again with these parameters. Right? So that's what's happening there. And I will break that down here in just a minute to make that a little clearer. But I'm going to leave it up there in case I do miss that. It seems the action creator you wrote do something, but does it not need an actual function? How does React know what to do with do something? Great question. The way that React knows what to do with it, in fact, I'm going to step through this right now. I'm going to show you what is happening here. I am going to come into update title, and I'm going to put a debugger statement in. All right. And then we are going to update our title. We stop on the debugger, okay? Remember I told you that the props update title, remember at the top, we are pulling update title, our action creator, from actions. We're pulling the action creator from actions, and then we are connecting it down below to the Redux system. So the Redux system, when we call connect, it now knows about update title, and it knows that we want to be passed in update title on our props, so we can call it. But notice when I actually step through this, so I'm going to step over our debugger, I'm going to step into update title. And you would think if I'm stepping into update title, if I step into update title, you would think that it would then take us to this console log line on number 2 for update title. It does not do that because the Redux system did something else with that. So if we step into update title, notice we are in Redux.js. Right, so that function that we are calling on props is a function that is in Redux.js. They've created this function and enhanced and passed it back. Notice what this function is being passed on this bind action creator. This function that is being passed, the very first parameter is our update title from index.js. Right? And the first thing it's going to do on line 483, the first thing it's going to do, this dot apply is a way of calling that function, that action creator. It will call that action creator with the arguments that we passed in, which was test. It's going to call that action creator first. And it will then return back from that action creator our action. And then look what it does next. On line 48, when that action gets returned back, it then dispatches it. This is the dispatch call that Redux is doing for us. All right? So let's step through this. We're going to step through. So the first thing it's going to do is take us into our action creator. Look at that. Doing exactly what we expected it to do. We're going to step over that. We are now going to return. It's going to return back an action. So now it has an action that's part of inside this dispatch call. I'm now going to step into dispatch. And remember, our dispatch before was part of use reducer. That dispatch is what then updates this state, right, for the use reducer. This dispatch is part of the Redux system. So you can expect it to update the Redux state, the Redux store, with the action that we told it. So the question was, to make it very clear, question was, how does React know what to do with do something? How it knows what to do is because our action creator tells it this is the action we would like to perform. And the Redux system says, okay, we're going to dispatch this. So let's step into that dispatch. And now you see this dispatch does a couple of interesting things that we weren't aware of before. We didn't know it. The first thing it wants to do, it wants to make sure that your action is actually an action. And remember, we said an action is an object that has a type. So that's the first couple of checks that dispatch will do. It checks to make sure it's a plain object. Right, and when it says plain object, it means when there are other things that mask as objects in JavaScript, it's making sure it's not one of those other things. Instead, it's saying, hey, this is a plain object, and so it passes that test. It then wants to make sure that it has a type. Right, it has a type, so it does that. This is a little more confusing. It basically says the Redux system will not allow you to dispatch an action that it has not, when it has not resolved the current action. So basically, if inside our dispatching of that action, we then end up calling a new dispatch, it's going to error. It says your reducers may not dispatch action. Notice the code here, reducer. The reducer that we are passing to Redux is here on line 12. It is our reducer, it's our code. So if we went into this reducer, and inside this reducer, we didn't just simply pass an action back, instead, or a state back. We didn't pass the state back, and instead we then dispatched a new action inside this title reducer. it would error on us and say, your reducers can't do that. That'll mess everything up. So that's what that's doing. You don't have to worry. By the way, these are things, I'm just showing you this, hopefully give you understanding. You don't. The only thing you really need to know is that the updates title is telling Redux to the action that gets generated from our code to update the store with that action and with the reducers that we passed into it. All right, so then it goes to dispatching. It sets is dispatching to true, so it would error on this if we tried to do another is dispatching. All right, so this is pretty cool. We have current reducer. Notice when I mouse over current reducer, and this is you don't see that defined in this object anywhere. This is part of the Redux system. It is going through each reducer and passing those reducers into the dispatch. It is saying this dispatch says all the reducers we have pass this action to every one of those reducers. So it'll then tell us what it wants to do with it. Our current reducer is our only reducer. It's the title reducer. Right? It is our title reducer. Our current state, this is the state as we have it now. It is the title of Dragon member list. But if we step into our title reducer, what that is going to do is it's passing our action. Well, let's define that first. It's passing our action of update title. It will then switch on that updates title and return back a new state. Our new state makes editing as false, and our new state makes the payload. So if we return back that state, our current reducer, we now have modified our current state. It's now set our current state to that it's done the changes that we wanted it to do. And then after it's done that correctly, we're now not dispatching anymore. It's already dispatched through all of our current reducers. And then this is internal. Don't worry about that. And then when we return back from this dispatch, it will, if we return back from the bind action creator, that's when the React system goes through and says, hey, this state, is it the same or has it changed? If it's changed, let's notify everything else. So that is what's happening inside our dispatch. Okay, and that was the update title. Now this dispatch is going to call the use reducer dispatch. And I'm not going to step through that. I mean, if I step through that, you'll see if I go into it, it's React to DOM. It's not Redux. That dispatch is part of the use reducer dispatch, not the Redux dispatch, as I was telling you before. And then it does its own update of that state variable. I'm not going to walk through that because we don't really need to know that for use reducer. And then I'm just going to execute it, and it sets the is editing to false, updates the React system updates the state. All right, so that is what is happening there. I hope that was a bit more instructive to understand that the main difference between use reducer from the React system, the use reducer deals with a local level state wherever you have the use reducer. This is the local level state. It's not application level state, and it gives you a dispatch, not an action creator. But that dispatch, you then pass it the actions. The Redux system says, give us your action creators and give us your reducers, and we will then pass back to you on the component you're interested in, which you define down here. Say, we are interested in this action creator, and it will then say, okay, I'm going to enhance that action creator. I'm going to give it to you as a props, and then when you call that, we will update the Redux store and inform the React system of that update. Okay. And yes, we spent all this time answering questions, which I think is fine, but I wanted to go over this anyway. We do need a break now, but I'm going to actually, before I do that, I'm going to look at some of these questions and see. Okay. 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 This one right here. So you pretty much start out context API and then you refactor to Redux if it calls for it. No, I would not. There's no need for Redux if you're using context API. You start out with context API. There's no need. The only time I would do that is Redux came out with a new release that did something absolutely amazing that I needed in my application. I don't expect that to be the case. So that's not what I would do. Okay, answer that question. All right, let's take a 5-minute break. I will see you all in 5 minutes. Okay, we are back. We're going to continue answering questions because it is important that we understand this. I know it's been removed. I must have actually marked it off, but I want to. The one question was a little more understanding of Connect and what that's doing. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to show you. I'm going to refactor this. And I'm going to refactor this in a way that I hope will help you understand. So I'm going to do a const higher order component equals connect map state to props and our updates title. Oops, comma there. All right, and then I want to const new component equals higher order component. That's a function that we then pass in a component. And then I'm going to do a export default new component. Okay. This is exactly what is happening on lines 58 through 63. Right? This connect part, connect call, is this, and it's returning back a function, right? So that connect is this part right here, exact same part there. But in this case, we're returning back that function and assigning it a variable. So we can then call that function on line 69. The call of that function is happening anonymously here. We don't have a name of the function. We just know because of the parentheses, we know that this is a function, this should be a function that returns back. If it doesn't return back a function, then we would error out in JavaScript. We would say, hey, you're trying to call something as a function that's not a function, right? So that's what that does. And then this higher order component call then returns back. So all of this, all of this will return back a new component that we are just exporting that new component. But down here, we're calling that, and then we're exporting as default, and it's going to operate exactly the same. Oh yeah, I'll be erroring over here. Got to close that. There we go. Going to execute just exactly the same. Okay. So I'm only showing you this, so I hope it will actually help you understand linearly. But this is the syntax you almost always see. Okay, so I will, in fact, I will do it this way. This is the preferred syntax, but this down here will hopefully help you understand what's going on there. Okay, so that map state to props puts state in the store. Okay, let's go over map state to props, because I saw over here we had some questions about map state to props. Go over that again. Okay. Remember, connect is part of the Redux system. It's a function that Redux knows about. We're getting it from the React Redux system. And when we call connect, we're basically saying connect this map state to props and these action creators to this component. That's what this connect does. And it does that by returning back a React component, and then it can go and do its thing, right? So map state to props, what that is saying to the Redux system, it is saying this state that you see here is the Redux store. Right? This state is the Redux store, which we are getting from this initial state in this reducer. Okay, so this state is the Redux store, and we are then saying for our application level state, and for this component, because we're connecting this map state to props to this component is interested in this piece of state, this title. And by the way, we're not only interested in this title, we want you to pass this title to us with this name on your properties, title and props. That's what the map state to props does. It maps the state of the component. I mean, it probably would be better left to right read map props to state, because the props are on the left-hand side of the colon, the state is on the right-hand side. But it's a mapping of saying the property will be passed in as this, and this is the state that we want aligned with that property. Whenever this state changes, we want to be notified of that change through this property. And then, of course, that gets connected through here. And then update title, again, that gets passed to us as a property. Redux does things through properties. Okay, where is state held? Where can I console log to see all the state? And the console log for the create store only shows function but no state. That is correct. State is actually held, or the Redux store is in memory. It's an in-memory store. There may be other ways in Redux to have it stored in different locations, but it's in memory. I think the best place you could see it is if you use the debugger, and when you get into that place where it's saying current reducer, it's calling the current reducer, it will then pass back the state from that reducer. You should have all the state there. But you can't, I mean, I was looking earlier, one of the things you can do, if we looked at our componentry, and if we looked at our provider, you can see our provider has the store as a property. It's being passed in the store, but all that does is it passes in a function of get state. So you can't actually see the state there, just as a broad. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think you can. Oh, there's a memo. This might be, although this could be, no, this could be it. This might be it right here. That's pretty cool. In fact, let me update this and see if that gets updated. And the answer is, no, it does not. Okay. So I'm not sure what this memo hook is in here for. But yeah, you can't really get access to that in the same way. You'd have to actually put in code. Or for that matter, if you're doing it inside your code, the state that's being passed in is the current state of the system. So you could actually log this out, console log your state and your action, and you would see that happen. Console log your state and your action. That state would be displayed in that console log as it calls the title reducer. Is this line of code, use reducer, considered application level state or component level state? That is component level state. The reason is, if you look at it, this state variable is declared in this component. You are not accessing this state variable anyplace else except in this component. So therefore, use reducer in this way is component level state. Now you could use reducer in other places and other locations and make it simulate an application level state, or make it hook up to other context, or maybe context API or whatever. There is a possibility. But in this particular case, this pattern of use reducer is the way we're using it now is application level state. And for that matter, it is using it for the proper thing, which is we kind of only want, I'm sorry, not application, it's component level state. And we only want it to be component level state because all it does is inform how this component should display. That's all it's doing. And so that's a good candidate for component level state. Great questions. Okay. I'm going to try to blow through this. I'm going to go fast, but hopefully not too fast. I will stop and explain. We might go over a bit, but I think the questions were great, and I hope I was able to bring you all along with that. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, you may think that we want to change the is updating, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to implement this part down here. I'm going to leave this in here so y'all can remember what we talked about with the use reducer. Even though we're using the same reducer, right? It does not update the this use of the reducer will only update this state here because use reducer, whereas the Redux use of the reducer, which is Redux create store, Redux use of the reducer will update the eponymous Redux store, right? So, all right. So now let's, we're not going to use title anymore. We have actions. We have our reducers. One other thing I want to do with actions and reducers, I want to point out, we have an action file here. And we have the type here, the text of update title. And then we have over here for reducers also the text of update title. If we have a misspelling here or we have a typo, then things are going to break and it's going to be hard to follow. And so the way that we deal with that generally is we create a title name. With our text. And then on this location, we just use the title name variable, because if we actually had a typo, it would tell us, hey, you can't do that. If we had a typo inside the quotes, it would just happily move on. Right? But in this case, we're using the update title. We're also exporting it so that our reducer can import it. And then at this location, we then call update title. And so now if somebody comes into the action and we have a typo on the quotes, well, guess what? It doesn't matter because this type will be update title without the E. And then that's the same thing that's going to match on here. Right, so that's a way to avoid some of those strange errors. And you'll see this all throughout Redux code or places that have action names. So actions inside Redux have action names, action creators, and then actions. Okay. Now let's go ahead and we want to create, inside our action, we want to, let me check my notes real quick. I want to make sure I don't miss anything else before I move to this next section. Okay. So notice as we pull up our Dragon list, notice we have a local state, class state for our members. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these members and I'm going to make them part of our application level state. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to update the initial state of our reducer. I'm going to update that with members. And I will just copy those over. There we go. Okay, so now we have members in our application level state because this is the same reducer that's being added again over here on line 12. It's being added to the create store. All right. And so I'm now going to remove this members from the local state. It's going to error on us. Why? Because this is looking for members. It's mapping through members. So let's fix that. And the way we're going to fix that is we're going to connect this component to our state, to our Redux. So we're going to connect. Remember, we did map state to props, and this one will leave blank for now. And then that returns a higher order component that we need to call with our Dragon list component. and that will then return that. It's going to error because we don't have map state to props. So I'm going to do that. Const map state to props. So this is our application level state. And then we need to return an object that has, I'll say members. I'll just do members here. This is how it's normally done. So this is the name that's going to be passed in as a property, is members. And that's going to be mapped to the members variable that we created over here in our reducer. Okay. And so now that's all working, except it's now trying to pull from state, which we don't have members as state. We need to change this to map through the props. And again, for a class component, we need to just this props. Hey, and look at that. It's pulling up here just fine. And if we go and look at our componentry, then you will see Dragon List is now getting members as props, and that's what we're mapping through. It's getting that from the Redux system, right? And then we now need to update, this input is actually updating fine. Now this input, again, remember I told you that you have a component level state. This managed component, this input managed component, is being input for the value of local state. So this is a local state variable. We're going to keep that here. But what we want, and that's going to be updated, we're setting the state to that. What we want is when we click add member, this new member variable will then update our members array. All right. So I'm going to create a handler, handle add member. We're going to do prevent default. And then we're going to add that to the button down here. On click equals handle add member. And then, let's see. Why is that erroring? Handle, oh, it's because it needs to be a this handle add member, because this is a class component, right? So we created a class handler, or a event handler that's on the class function, class method, and then we're calling it. Okay, so now when we add member, it'll just prevent default. So here, in this location, we need to update the Redux member store. And the way we do that is through an action creator. So let's go create an action. Our action creator will be export add member. And I'm going to make it so that we just pass in the new member name, because that's what we're typing in that field. And then I'm going to return our action. Our action is going to be a type of add member. And our payload, I'm going to do something a little different with that. But first I'm going to come up here. We're going to export const add member equals add member. And our payload, we're going to make our payload be the actual member object. Right now, all we're getting is the text. But if we look at our member, we have an object that has a name and it has a dragon status. And so here in the action, our payload, we're going to expand that out and make our payload an object. And our payload is going to be name of new member name, and then dragon status. Since this is a new person, it has a false dragon status. We do not have a dragon status for this person. Okay, so this is our action creator. This is the action we want to do. We want our reducer to reduce. So now let's go look at our reducer. Our reducer does not know about that add member. So let's import the action name, and let's put another case in here. Case add member. then what we're going to do is return this. Again, remember, this is the application state. So we're going to return the existing state, except we want members to have one added to it. And if you remember last time when we talked about state, you need to spread even the stuff inside the state. You do not want to you do not want to morph the state. And so the way we do that is we spread the state members, and then we just add the action payload. That'll be a new member added to the array, right? So we are creating a new object and a new array. And that new array has our changes for our add member, which is our add member is going to be the payload. That payload is here on action. We're creating the object here, and that's just going to add it there on the bottom. So now let's go back to our Dragon list. When we click on handle add member, we now need to update the Redux system. We need to call this action. But this is an creator. We need to import member from actions, and then we need to connect that member to this admin, and what we're going to do, a new member. Sorry, it's this.state.member. So we're used to working in functions. I forget that we're in classes now, right? So the new member gets updated as we type this. When we add member, it calls the reduxified add member function that is passed as props, which goes through that step that we went through to show, updates the Redux system, which then tells the React system, hey, these items have changed, and whenever the members have changed, the members of our application store, of our Redux store, whenever that changes, then the members property changes, and that gets propagated through our component, which then the members get updated here on line 25. And so let's test that out. Boom, add new member. Fantastic. Okay. The next thing I need to do to flesh this application out is I need to make it so that we can click and change the Dragon status. And we have 10 minutes left. I'm actually going to hop over and see if there's any questions right now before I do that, because I want to make sure that we hit the questions. Yes, the answer is generally no. So the question is, are we supposed to use the use reducer hook when we're using Redux? This simultaneous refactor is tripping me up. That is some good feedback, and I actually can understand that. I think maybe what I'll do, and you can see, I mean, this is a big lesson as it is. I feel really bad about this because really the only interaction y'all get with this, because I wanted to make sure we got through the material, the only interaction you get is when you're asking questions. And I'm not having you do exercises here because this has been typically a very challenging lesson. But what I will do is after I get the Dragon status updated properly in here, I will then go back and refactor out the use reducer for is editing. I will make it so that is editing is no longer part of our reducer at all. Right? I'm going to put that inside the application state. Okay. So that way, hopefully, it'll be a bit clearer. All right, so let's do that. Dragon status. So for the Dragon status, again, what we started with last time is we're looking at Dragon list, and we're saying, okay, this is, let's see, where is that displaying? Boom, boom, boom. Okay, here we go. This I is where the Dragon status is displaying. And so I'm going to say, we're going to actually put an on click on this H4. So let's do a on click equals handle dragon status. And then let's create that up here. Handle, oh, this needs to be a this.handle dragon status. We're going to do a handle dragon status. And then here we can look up here and see what it's going to be like. So we're going to do a this props. We're going to actually call this one toggle dragon status and probably do it as an index, right? So an index, right? So we're going to need to pass that into handle dragon status. But let's, before we do that, before we factor that here, let's go and create this toggle dragon status action. So we're going to come here, export const toggle dragon status equals index. And then we are just going to return a type of toggle dragon status. And our payload is just going to be our index. And then, of course, we need to toggle dragon status, toggle dragon status. And then our reducer needs to be aware of it. So toggle dragon status. And then our reducer function needs to be aware of it. We're going to return our existing state with a new members array. And the easiest way to deal with that is we're going to take the existing members array. That's irritating. Let's say state dot members dot map. We're going to map through it. Remember, our maps takes the member and will give us an index. So since our payload is going to have the index, we can now say if index equals payload index, then what we want to do is we want to return back our member, but with the dragon status toggled, the opposite of what it currently is. If, on the other hand, it's not equal to the index, then we're just going to return back itself. And that payload should be action payload. Okay. So again, all we're doing is we're creating a new members with the dragon status toggled on the index that we want it to be toggled on. Right? So that means that over in our dragon list, we want to make sure that what we're clicking on is the right index. We are getting the index through, let's see, we're getting the index through our map. So that is happening on the on-click. It is calling that. All right, I'm going to do it. We're going to have to do it this way. I'm going to handle dragon status, and we're just going to pass an index there because we don't need to prevent default. And so this is going to be the index. I'm going to actually change that because this is no longer an event handler. This is no longer an event handler. In fact, we need to actually make it an event handler. There we go. So that's an event handler, and we want to do this handle dragon status. There we go. So it's an empty event handler we're not doing anything with, but we're calling handle dragon status. I'm going to change that to toggle because it's not an event handler. I'm going to change this to toggle. There we go. All right, and then you should see toggle dragon status is not a function. This dot toggle dragon status. Oh, it's let's see, toggle dragon status. I'm going to change this because I think it may be affecting the name. This dot update dragon status. Oh, you know what? It's erroring out because this event handler has a different this context, I believe. So let me. This is. Okay. All right. I'm going to actually now. Let's see. Updates dragon status. It says it's not a. All right. Let's see if we can do it on the first one. All right. So let me break this out. Just to make sure, I got to break it out because there's an error in here. I'm not quite sure where it is. So we're going to do a handle dragon status. We're going to go back to that. And we're going to pass in a handle dragon status. And that should be this handle dragon status. And then I'm going to toggle dragon status on 0. And this should be E. And let's see if that works. It does not. Toggle dragon status. Okay, so that's where it was erroring. It's this toggle dragon status. It's not a function. Oh yeah, we didn't pass it down here. Good call, Sumat. Toggle dragon status. Good catch. And we're going to toggle dragon status. There we go. And now we can go back to this because we need to get access to that index. So we're going to go back to this. And it's going to be handle dragon status of the index. This, let's see, this handle dragon status index. There's one too many parentheses there. There we go. And this should be index. And this should be index. All right. And that's actually not toggling it. Let's see if we're logging out something. Let's take a look. Payload 1. All right, let's take a look at our reducer. We should be updating members here. So I am going to put a Diga. We have, oh, we're returning member with dragon status toggled. Okay. And it is member dragon status state members index is equal to action payload. Oh, we don't have an index there. It's just payload. Our payload is the index. All right, so now we're toggling the dragon status. Great. Okay, it is time. I'm going to refactor for those of you that are confused. And good catch on all of y'all. Sometimes when I get towards the end and I start going fast, I go slower, and that's a lesson to be learned. But I want to make sure. Okay, we don't have any more questions, so stick around if you want to. If you want to see a refactor of our title to get rid of the use reducer altogether, so that way it's not confusing. because I think that will help. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make, since the only thing we're using this edit for is to display what is to inform what this component displays, I'm just going to turn it into a state variable that's local and using useState. And so let me go ahead and do that. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to break everything by making sure we do not have editing inside our application level state. It doesn't belong there, so we're not going to have it there. And notice when I do that, it'll break for us, although that didn't for some reason. Oh, because it added it. It's something about JavaScript. If you don't have a variable, it'll just add it when you update it. And so that is, let me get rid of dragon list. Let me look at the title. So we have use reducer. I am going to comment that out entirely. And I'm going to create a is editing, set is editing. And our editing is going to start out as false. All right. And then we don't have a state, so we can't log that. And then we don't have a dispatch anymore. And so our handle update is just going to set is editing to false. And then our state is not editing. Our state was coming from the use reducer. Instead, it's just a is editing variable. And then we don't have a dispatch to toggle editing. And so instead, we are going to set is editing to be equal to the opposite of what it currently is. And there we go. That's our refactor. We don't need the reducer anymore. So we have completely, we don't need the use reducer. So we now completely refactored the is editing. It's now not part of any contextual or reducer state. It is now just a component level state. And if we come up here and click on this, type in the text, it's editing just fine now. So hopefully that's a little more clear. The use reducer, I think, is confusing you because we're using the same reducer as we were with Redux, but it actually creates two different stores and modifies those stores differently. So I think it'll be good for me next time just to make sure I go a step further. In fact, I think what I might do next time is refactor the is editing out first to use the state and then refactor the title for the title state. Okay, there's no more questions. So good luck. Sorry we went 5 minutes over, but I know you struggled with this, but the recording will be up. You can watch other people's as well. Looks like some people, your team is actually helping you learn a little bit more. So yeah, Redux, so that's useful. Kara's got that. But yeah, use whatever resources you can to actually get this stuff down. And I will see you all in a couple of days. We're going to be doing asynchronous Redux where we get access to the internal dispatch of Redux. And you'll see why we want to do that. And things are going to start really coming together here pretty soon. We'll see you all in 2 days.